So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for having me here. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to share with you some of my perceptions about China and the chances for the Netherlands and China in mutual beneficial sides to progress from this moment into the future. I think the two earlier speakers have already very effectively pointed out the importance of China in the coming era. China is the biggest world producer. It is the world's biggest consumer. It is the world's highest amount of foreign exchange reserve. It is becoming a very big investor in the world economy. It is an important factor in maintaining regional and international order and stability. So it is a country that is on the rise, and like it or not, we cannot ignore the existence and the importance of China anymore. I agree 100% about Mr. Kam's earlier idea about that we should develop the Netherlands into a hub for Chinese investors to venture into Europe, and hopefully we will have time and come back to that and discuss a bit further. But we can see that China's rise involves a lot of challenge and opportunities for European countries, for America, for the rest of the world. But at the same time, we also need to look at China in a more practical way. The economy is going so far not bad, but it is not without problems. Domestically, China faces many challenges, increasing challenges. The social security system is not functioning very well. The poor is getting poor. Income inequality is a major problem. Food security, food regulation is minimal. We have a lot of food scandals that affects the long-term health problem of the entire population. Corruption is rampant. There are increasing incidents of demonstrations, protests against local governments, officials, etc., etc. So China is facing problems despite the excellent economic record. And like it or not, the existing way of governing the country needs to be changed in order to cope with those problems, because those problems are not just temporary problems that will be resolved in itself. They are not problems that relates to a failure in policy or just a kind of a short-term problematic. A lot of those are structural, and it requires bold efforts to address them by changing the way that the society, economy, and government are running. So in a way, change in a way, just like what Obama said, it's inevitable, and we don't know where it will be coming, but it is going to be a big topic also in the future. My question is, how can we facilitate this change so that it can be of mutual benefit to China and the Netherlands? How can we facilitate the change so as to benefit the people in China and the people in the West? I would like to propose a certain approach. I think this is an important issue that I have in different occasions tries to make this point forward, but I think it is also important to put it one more time. That is how we should look at and promote those changes that we can expect China to be more open, to be more positive in its role in regional and world welfare and stability. there are a number of things that we should do and we shouldn't do. And I think it is more important to notice the things that we shouldn't do. There are, at some point in time, a lot of arguments about the threat of China, that it's becoming a threat to the world, that it is a country still full of human rights problems, etc., etc. I would warn against putting a hostile attitude towards China in order to press ahead for changes, because it is in a peaceful environment that you can facilitate the change into an open society. With a hostile environment that is trying to push China to a certain direction can only have a negative impact in a sense that it will see a hostile nations around the world, especially in the West, trying to put across certain values and threaten the survival of the regime, and as a result may retreat into further closure and actually legitimize more repression. And this actually we have seen in a lot of the cases. I think during the Olympics is a very good example that international pressures tries to pressure China to get more open, to be more lenient towards the opposition, etc., etc., actually has backfired and resulted in one of the most stringent period in recent years. We should also, at the same time, prevent the rise of emotional and nationalist sentiments among the people. This is also another rather dangerous development that may hamper the positive development of China. As we all know, China, it's very historical conscious. It used to see itself as suffering from Western humiliation for years, dragging its development behind, etc., etc. So down in the bottom of the heart of many Chinese people, there is this strong nationalistic sentiment that they wish to be strong, that they wish to be recognized with dignity and play a positive role in the economy. But if they met with all those external hostility, there is a danger that will retreat into anti-foreign nationalistic sentiment. This also is not something that we would like to see. So in short, I would argue that we need to do or not to do certain things. We shouldn't be pressing ahead with emotional criticisms, because emotional criticisms doesn't really change the current human rights situation. We should use persuasions rather than hostile attack and saying that, and bash China all the time, saying, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. China is not Sudan. You can't use pressures to say, you have to change this, and otherwise I won't give you a certain help or aid. China couldn't care less. Yeah. You cannot tell China what to do. The best way to do is to facilitate China to change itself, or better, to facilitate the people to change its own country. Just like an analogy, in this point, I think it is rather important that we understand and disaggregate the idea of China. We should be careful about when we talk and criticize the Chinese government and the Chinese people. Yeah? I have a neighbor. The neighbor moved into a house with a very bad landlord. The toilet stinks. The roof leaks. is staying in very unpleasant conditions. When I introduce him to other friends, I say, well, this is my neighbor who lived in a house that's with a stink toilet and a leaking roof. I went to church and introduced this new fellow and said, well, no, this is my neighbor who lives in the stinking toilet, the house with stinking toilet and a leaking roof. Then you do it again and again and again. And then eventually, this fellow will say, sorry, I'm not going to mix up with you anymore because I'm being victimized and stigmatized as the person who has the stinking toilet and the leaking roof. And actually, he is the victim. The one that is abusing his welfare is the landlord. If we go ahead and say, well, China has this problem and that, we run that similar kind of risk because most of the people in China, they are partly the victims of certain oppressive, repressive, or undesirable regimes and rules. And if you keep on saying, well, China is doing that badly, wrongly, that analogy actually comes in rather handy in the sense that they will get this feeling and say, well, the rest of the world is actually against the Chinese people. We have to make it a very clear distinction that whenever we want to criticize certain rules regimes, that we are targeting a specific policy, a specific government, a specific institution, or a specific people. When we say Chinese move out of Tibet, that is a big problem because you are stigmatizing the people rather than the government itself. And I think this is a very important approach when we deal with China and when we try to find our opportunities to facilitate the change in China to our own mutual benefits. In order to keep the right approach, I think, to deal with China, I think we need a rather comprehensive strategy in dealing with Chinese affairs. We cannot have fragmented ideas about China. On the one hand, that our businessmen shake hands with Chinese entrepreneurs, but at the same time, our NGOs go and knock at the door and shout at Chinese officials, and our government carry out policies with a different ideas in mind. I think a comprehensive strategy taking with the lead of the government, with the involvement of the business sector, with the academic sector, with NGOs, and so on and so forth. It's a very important way of furthering and facilitating this process. There are a couple of areas I think we can take the lead in the Netherlands to facilitate that process. We have to ask ourselves first whether we want to be in an active role promoting changes in China in a positive way within the European Union, or we just want to sit back and play a laid-back position and say, well, we just follow whatever EU wants to do. Do we want to promote a multipolar world that is not only dominated by Europe and America, but also with space for other countries to play? I think this is something that the whole nation needs to discuss and to decide, because this will affect our strategic positions in the future. And I think Netherlands is well placed within the European Union to play a positive role in this regard, because we are not the big countries. We are not France, we are not Germany, we are not Britain, with a lot of difficult history with China. We have a long history of friendship exchanges, and we're small. And being small, it is not threatening, so it's rather easy to facilitate, to communicate with China. And we have to go through our economic policies, our political policies, our social policies, to see what kind of things that we can do. We need a package. I'll take up Mr. Kam's proposal, for example. We need to develop a hub for China as the European headquarters for its Chinese enterprises, because in the last 10 years, less than 10 years, China is now changing its strategy. They want to move from the workshop of the world to become a world investor. It has policies to encourage large-scale enterprises to go out to invest in the rest of the world. So Chinese enterprises want to become multinational companies. To do that, they require a lot of knowledge, they require a lot of trust, they require some foothold in order to do that. And the Netherlands can quite easily become one of those. But in order to become one of those, it is not just enough to have an economic policy or business communities that is willing to accept that. We also have the other kinds of policies. We need to be able to enable Chinese to come here more easily. We need to have better transportation systems in order to attract them. Those of you who have been to, for example, Helsinki, taking Finnair, you will find in the Helsinki airport more Chinese than in Shanghai. All Chinese are flocking into the Helsinki airport. Why? Because they take the opportunity that all the flights from Shanghai, Beijing, Shenyang to Europe need to pass by Helsinki. You have to go through that. That's the shortest route. And one of the best ideas for that is just to provide a transit point for them. You come to Helsinki, and you can go to Frankfurt, you can go to Heathrow, you can go to Schiphol, and etc., etc. So lots of people are flocking into that. And for that, the business can grow. So you need this kind of matching policies for that. We need to be able to inform the Chinese entrepreneurs, the Chinese publics about the Netherlands. At the moment, I think there is strong interest in China about every European countries, but there is very little information that we actually offer to China about where is the Netherlands, what is the Netherlands. Do people know that we actually can speak English here? Or lousy Dutch, like I do. Those kind of information we need to offer. We need to have a good education exchange programs in order to attract more talented young people from China to study in the Netherlands. I have an interesting theory. In Leiden, we send students to study Chinese in China for a long, long time. And because of the limited number of scholarships, we usually divide it into two groups, one to mainland China, normally to Beijing, and the other group to Taipei, to Taiwan. And what I find is so interesting over the years is those students who sent to China and return, for the rest of his life, he will stay pro-China. Those students were sent to study in Taipei. When they came back, they will be pro-Taiwan. Yeah, and you know that those two places have tense relationships. But this is not my point. My point is, you study in a certain place, you know its culture, you have contact with the people, you become more sympathetic with that place. And it becomes a more welcoming place for that. That's part of the reason why America is offering so many scholarships to different countries, to different peoples all over the world, in order to allow everyone to become pro-America. And so far, when you ask anyone in China, do you want to go abroad to study, they will say yes, and the idea that they have in mind to go abroad means to go to the United States, to a lesser extent to Japan. It's only in rare circumstances that they would say, I want to go to Europe, because so far, opportunities for these people to come to Europe is rather limited. And that we are not doing ourselves a good favor in turning ourselves into a hub for Chinese enterprises in Europe, or facilitating more exchanges with China. So this is an important example where we can have more concrete policies and more integrated policies. I have a number of PhD students that I jointly supervise with universities in China. And I managed to get them out to come to the Netherlands for a short period of time to study and to do supervision. Normally it's three months, because longer than that we have a very difficult relationship with END for the visas and things like that. And to my surprise, this is not just once, but many, many times, all those students who come in here, after a month, they will have their eyes wide open and their ears wide open. And they started to rethink, not just looking at the Netherlands, they tried to look at China through a totally different perspective. They said, I've never heard of a China like this. I've never known a China like this, because of the freedom of information that we can get here, because of different knowledge that you can have it here, because of different things that you can absorb here. And this is the kind of things that we want to promote for change, because it is only when we can facilitate Chinese people to change its own society, its own government, that we can make it to a desirable directions. And just 3 months, I think it's quite enough to change the perception of these students. And they will, I believe, stay on for the rest of their life in searching for a different perspective, something other than the government told them to believe. And mind you, most of these students are long-term party members. They are not just ordinary citizens. One of those that I met is less than 30 years old, and he has already 11 years of party membership history. And he just couldn't believe that these are the recent contemporary histories that China actually goes through, because in China, some of those informations are not available. This is the kind of things that we should promote. In Harvard, they have been running a program for local party officials and government officials for years. They try to offer courses, degrees, public administration, good governance courses for government officials at the lower levels to study there for a short term and to learn some of the techniques, theories of public administration, of government, and so on and so forth. So far with a lot of success. And of course, with a whole generations of upcoming cadres and officials sympathetic to America. We should do the same. It costs money, but I think in the long run it will pay off. That we will be able to nourish, educate a generations of high-ranking party members in the future, potential leaders that has better understanding of Europe and can serve as a better medium of change between Europe and China. But this, all in all, requires a long-term strategy by the government with all those inputs from various sectors, from the business sector, from the academia, from society, about how or what is the best way of doing that. And of course, in order to do that, another very important requirement is that we need to understand China itself. We need to understand how it works. We understand the problems. We have to understand the institutional constraints, whatever. We need to understand why you cannot offer a clock as a gift to government officials. And we need to understand why, for example, guanxi is important. A lot of people would say, oh, guanxi, because the term sounds Chinese, and it looks as if this is a cultural thing. I would say 100-degree not. It probably is friendships, trusts, personal acquaintance is important in any countries as in China. China is exaggerated not because culturally it likes friendship, but because there are so many rules, restrictions, and gaps in the field of the play, that if you can get personal relations in, it allows you, it facilitates you to conduct your business easier by overcoming, in circumventing some of those rules. So it is institutional, it is structural, it's not cultural. But in order to do that, we need to really understand how China works. We need to pump in money into creating database knowledge for the business community, for society, for NGOs about what China is doing, what is not. And at the moment, as I said, this is fragmented. I'm from Leiden, and Leiden is at the moment the only center in China studies. So supposedly, everyone would like to see now China is upcoming, we should inject more money into it, but of course not, because over the last 10 years, we are under waves and waves and waves of cutting, and we are cutting to the bare bones. So this is actually running against the general trend that we need to know more, and that's because we don't have a comprehensive policy in coordinating all these different sectors. One area goes this direction, the other area goes backwards. So we can never achieve a concerted effort to capture this opportunity unless we come together and do something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tak Win Ngo, for your very clear presentation.